My name is Coraline Sutter, and on the day of my sister's wedding, I was treated like I didn't exist. The venue was a sunlit vineyard estate in Sonoma, all white canopies and picture-perfect roses, a setting my family had gushed over for months. I hadn't been part of the planning, nor had I been asked to arrive early for family portraits. My invitation came late, without a +1, and my name was spelled wrong. When I arrived alone, wearing the navy sheath dress my sister once called too serious, no one came to greet me. Not Savannah, the bride, not our parents. Certainly not Morton Hallbridge, her soon-to-be father-in-law, who glanced at me from across the terrace and turned away with a dismissive shrug, as if I were catering staff who'd overstepped. I wasn't surprised. In this family, absence had become my most consistent role. They thought they knew who I was, quiet, distant, unmarried. They assumed I was still fumbling through jobs, still that oddball who didn't belong in group chats or Christmas cards. I stayed silent, like I always did. But I didn't come to be seen. I came because one man was about to walk into this wedding, one man who would change the atmosphere with a single gesture. A man in a judicial robe who, before anything else, would stop, look at me, and bow. And in that moment, they would all realize I was never invisible. They had simply looked away. The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks before the date, tucked inside a cream envelope with gold embossing, addressed simply to Miss Coraline Sutter. Not even my name was right. No call from my sister, no message, just the envelope, as if sent out of obligation, like they'd realized too late they couldn't leave me off the guest list completely. I held it in my hands for a full minute, debating whether to throw it away. Then I tucked it into my drawer with the expired coupons and jury summons I'd never responded to. I wasn't going to beg to be included in a celebration that was already decided without me. Still, I showed up. I showed up because there's something about watching people misread you, misunderstand you for so long, that makes the reveal more satisfying when they finally realize they were wrong. Savannah had always been the glittering one. Blonde, charming, built for baby showers and brunches, for wine tastings and Pinterest boards. From the moment she turned 18, our parents declared she would marry well. I was the bookish one, the one who wore slacks to Thanksgiving and forgot to smile for photos. I didn't blame her entirely for the rift between us. Some families are trained to spotlight one child and keep the rest in the wings. Savannah didn't choose the role, but she never once offered to share the stage either. I remember the call she made 2 years ago, her voice bright and falsely warm. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I know we've had our differences, but I really hope you'll be happy for me," Charles proposed. "Isn't that wild?" I'd offered polite congratulations, and she hadn't noticed the pause. She never asked what I'd been up to, never asked if I was seeing anyone, or if I was still working in law. As far as she was concerned, I'd faded into the background of her life. Unremarkable, optional. So when I arrived at the wedding alone, in that navy dress with structured shoulders and modest heels, I felt no pressure to impress. I wasn't trying to reclaim a seat at their table. I was simply there to observe. The parking attendants ignored me. The check-in table staff paused, then asked if I was with the photographer. I gave my name. They blinked, then reluctantly handed me a place card. Table 9, corner pavilion. That was the overflow table, the one where ex-coworkers and distant cousins sat, near the speakers, beside the kitchen entry. It was a place for people no one remembered. As I made my way through the crowd, I caught sight of Morton Hallbridge, the groom's father, standing in a small circle of his own family. Polished men in tailored suits and women in pearl-dotted fascinators. He had the kind of voice that never dipped below a public volume, like he was used to being listened to. Our eyes met briefly. His expression didn't change. He turned his back before I reached the terrace. I took my seat at table 9 without comment. There were already 2 guests there, both older women, who introduced themselves as friends of the groom's aunt. Neither of them asked me how I knew the bride. They probably assumed I didn't. The string quartet began tuning behind the hydrangea arch. Champagne was being passed. People were laughing. I sat quietly, watching Savannah pose with the bridesmaids, her veil tossed elegantly over one shoulder. Our parents hovered close, proud and beaming. The photographer never once gestured toward me. It was strange how calm I felt, like a guest at a performance I'd already seen the ending to. They had written me out of this script so thoroughly, so deliberately, they didn't even realize I was holding a pen of my own. Dinner was plated and served with choreographed grace. I moved through the motions, salad fork, polite smile, sip of wine, with the practiced ease of someone who's had years of practice pretending not to hear what's said across the table. "Is that the sister?" I heard one of the groom's cousins murmur behind a napkin. "The one who never married?" "She looks older than I expected." It wasn't meant for me to hear, but they didn't lower their voices enough, and truthfully, I didn't care. There was a time when I would have flushed, made myself smaller. Now I simply adjusted my posture and raised my wineglass, letting their gaze meet someone unbothered. At the head table, Savannah was radiant under the canopy lights. She leaned toward Charles with a rehearsed laugh, her smile trained perfectly for photos. From where I sat, she looked like someone who had worked hard to build a life that photographed well. Between courses, a few guests circulated. One, a woman with coral lipstick and an overconfident tone, stopped at my table and asked, "So, how do you know the bride?" I smiled. "She's my sister." "Oh." Her brows lifted slightly. "And what do you do?" Before I could answer, Savannah appeared. Timed, perhaps, or just unfortunate. She draped an arm lightly around the woman's shoulders and said with a chuckle, "Cora's always been the mysterious one. She dabbled in law for a bit, didn't you, sis?" I looked at her. She hadn't called me Cora since college. "I still work in law," I said. Savannah blinked, that tight smile flickering for a fraction. "Oh, right. She's very private. She does, well, it's complicated work." The coral lipstick woman nodded vaguely and turned to ask someone about the signature cocktail. Savannah didn't meet my eyes before slipping away again. It was always like that. Half-truths and polite evasions, the art of saying enough to dismiss me without sounding cruel. To outsiders, she was just managing a difficult sibling. To me, she was scrubbing me out of her narrative, one wedding guest at a time. And yet none of them knew. None of them knew that I'd spent the last 12 years not only practicing law, but quietly rising through its most cloistered corridors. I'd clerked for a federal judge at 28. I'd been recruited into the Office of Special Counsel for Judicial Integrity by 32. Now, I served as a lead legal analyst and advisor for multi-district litigation involving federal oversight. Cases so sensitive most of them weren't printed in newspapers. But those were not the kinds of jobs you wrote on Instagram bios. There were no champagne toasts or LinkedIn posts with ring lights. My work happened in rooms where cameras weren't allowed, where silence was currency. So yes, I let them think I was dabbling. I let Savannah perform her little rewrite of me because I'd long stopped trying to edit the version of me she told the world. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone else was coming to this wedding, someone who'd been my mentor, someone whose name made defense counsels flinch and entire panels quiet. And when he arrived, the story Savannah had rehearsed for so long would collapse in a single nod, and she wouldn't be able to curate what came next. I hadn't always planned to disappear from family view, but somewhere between law school graduation and my first federal clerkship, I realized it was easier to work in silence than to defend my choices to people who never really asked. At 28, I landed a coveted clerkship under Judge Maxwell Lorne in the U.S. District Court. He was notorious for being exacting, brilliant, and merciless with attorneys who came unprepared. But he respected precision. He valued restraint. I gave him both. By the end of my term, he offered to bring me into his personal advisory staff. "You have the kind of mind that doesn't need the spotlight," he said. "That's rarer than you think." So while Savannah posted engagement photos from Lake Como and birthday brunches with hashtags, I buried myself in multi-state legal frameworks, white-collar fraud litigation, and confidential briefings. Eventually, I transitioned into the Federal Judicial Oversight Group, a small but powerful unit formed to advise on judicial integrity and review financial misconduct within legal systems. Most people didn't even know it existed. That was the point. I worked behind double-locked doors, burned through redacted files at 3 a.m., wrote memos that reached Senate desks under other names. And once, just once, I worked a case tied indirectly to Morton Hallbridge. Not directly, not in name, but his fingerprints were buried deep in a financial trail connecting a risk management group to a shell entity that had funneled assets out of a failed pension fund. The fund's collapse cost 3,000 retirees their monthly income. The trail was cold by the time we got to it, swept clean by expensive lawyers and NDAs. But I saw the traces, enough to know who had advised the laundering operation in its early phases. Morton Hallbridge's name never made the indictment list, but Judge Lorne's chambers discussed him, quietly and only in passing. We never said a word about it publicly. That was the nature of the work. We didn't pursue headlines. We made sure the machinery of justice didn't rust in the dark. It never occurred to me back then that I'd someday be standing near that same man, sipping mediocre Chardonnay at my sister's wedding, and hearing him say, "I always told Charles to marry someone from a family with ambition. You can't build empires with women who don't understand legacy." He didn't know I was standing behind him, or maybe he did. Maybe he didn't care. I simply walked past, placed my empty glass on a passing tray, and said nothing. I didn't need him to know who I was, because someone else already did. Earlier that week, Judge Lorne had emailed me. It was a single line. "I hear you'll be attending the Hallbridge wedding. I may stop by briefly after my panel. It'll be good to see you outside the courthouse." I hadn't replied. He never needed confirmation. If he said he might appear, he would. And unlike everyone else in that room, Judge Lorne didn't measure worth in small talk or social polish. He'd once told me, "There's power in being underestimated. Just don't let them mistake silence for absence." So I let Savannah keep telling her version of the story. Let Morton posture like the architect of some grand financial dynasty, because the version of me they'd erased was about to come roaring back, quietly and with more authority than any toast or seating chart could offer. The toast had just ended when he arrived. Judge Maxwell Lorne didn't wear a robe, but he didn't need one. He walked through the crowd like gravity moved around him, unhurried, deliberate, and immediately noticed. Conversations dimmed, people turned. He saw me and came straight toward table 9. When he stopped in front of me, he gave a slight bow, not dramatic, but unmistakable. "Miss Sutter," he said, his voice steady, low. "It's been too long." I stood, nodded. "Judge, I heard your analysis brief on the consolidated ethics case went into national circulation," he said. "Well done. I quoted you in D.C. last month." The words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Morton Hallbridge, Savannah's new father-in-law, was standing just feet away, holding a glass of champagne that now trembled slightly. His face had stiffened. Savannah appeared beside him, voice sweet but strained. "Judge Lorne, I didn't realize you knew my sister." "She clerked under me," he said plainly, then led federal reviews on high-profile ethics litigation. Her mind's one of the sharpest I've worked with. There was silence. Not the awkward kind, something colder, weightier. Savannah's smile faltered. She never mentioned. "She didn't have to," he said, glancing at me. "Some reputations speak without a stage." Morton cleared his throat. "Yes. Small world, isn't it?" Judge Lorne gave him a neutral nod. "Indeed, especially when people think they're unobserved." Then he looked at me again. "Thank you for your work, Coraline. Quiet minds like yours keep the system intact." And just like that, he turned and walked away. I stood still, hearing nothing but the silence he left behind. And for the first time that day, no one looked over me. No one dismissed me. They simply didn't know what to say. After Judge Lorne walked away, silence clung to the reception like smoke. It wasn't just the kind of hush that comes from confusion. It was deeper, an exposed nerve stillness. No one knew where to look. No one knew what version of me they had just seen. Savannah stood frozen. Her shoulders, once pulled back in confidence, were slightly rounded now, bouquet held too tightly against her hip. Morton didn't speak. He didn't even finish the champagne he'd been holding, just set the glass down on a side table and moved wordlessly to the edge of the crowd, jaw clenched, eyes unfocused. I returned to table 9, but the energy had shifted. The women who'd asked me earlier how I knew the bride now sat stiffly, not meeting my eye. Someone new approached the table, paused, then found a reason to sit elsewhere. I wasn't insulted. I'd simply become something unfamiliar, something not on the program. Eventually, Savannah made her way over, heels sinking slightly into the grass with each step. She sat in the empty chair beside me, the same one people had avoided all evening. For the first time that day, her voice was small. "You could have told me." I didn't look at her. "Told you what?" "That you clerked for a federal judge. That you still work in law. That you're—" She faltered, searching. "That you're doing something meaningful." I took a slow breath. "You never asked." She didn't argue. I thought, "You left all of it. That you gave up." "No," I said. I stepped back. "There's a difference." Savannah turned her head toward the dance floor, where guests were beginning to murmur again, softly trying to resume normalcy. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't part of things," she said after a moment. "But I guess I didn't make room for you either." I gave a small shrug. "You told your own story. I just stopped correcting it." "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded, not to absolve her, just to acknowledge the words. She looked down at her bouquet, adjusting a stem that had bent slightly. "I wanted everything today to go perfectly, and then he bowed to you." "That wasn't about you," I said quietly. "And it wasn't about the wedding. It was about work done when no one's watching." Savannah winced at the words. She heard what I didn't say, about who had always been watching, and who hadn't. I stood, smoothed my dress. "Congratulations, Savannah. Truly, I hope you and Charles build something honest." Her eyes lifted sharply at that last word, but she didn't protest. "I'll see myself out," I added. "No photos?" she asked, almost hopeful. "No family shot?" "I think I've spent enough time on the edge of frames," I said. "I'm good." She didn't follow when I left. She didn't call out, just sat there, wilting slightly, like a woman who finally realized the difference between presence and performance. At the valet. The young man in the maroon vest took my ticket with reverence. "Ma'am, if I may ask, was that really the judge who bowed to you?" I met his eyes. "Yes." "Who are you?" I smiled faintly. "Someone they didn't expect." He opened the door for me gently. As I slid in, I heard murmurs behind me. Wedding guests piecing together what they'd seen, what they'd missed, trying to reorder a story that had just been rewritten mid-celebration. I drove away with the windows down. The vineyard faded behind me in the rearview mirror. They would keep talking, speculating, wondering if I'd made everything up, or if they'd simply never cared enough to ask. But I didn't need them to know the truth. It had already arrived, bowed, and walked away. That night, I didn't drive home. I kept going, past the vineyards, past the wedding speeches, and the stunned silence they left behind. I didn't need anyone's permission to disappear for a while. I found a quiet diner off Highway 12, the kind where no one looks twice at a woman alone with black coffee and tired eyes. I sat by the window, let the hum of neon signs fill the spaces no words needed to. At the next booth, a little girl leaned toward her mom and whispered, "She looks important." Her mother smiled and hushed her, but the girl's eyes stayed on me, curious, unafraid, like she saw something even adults had missed. She didn't know my name. Didn't need to. I thought of Savannah, the bouquet wilting in her hand, the apology that came too late, too light. I thought of Morton, silent, small in a room he thought he owned, and I thought of Judge Lorne. No headlines, no applause, just a bow, just truth. They had all seen me now, but none of that changed who I was. I'd been doing the work long before they looked, the kind of work that doesn't trend, but endures. That's the thing about staying silent. It isn't weakness. It's choosing not to waste your voice on people who never wanted to hear it. And when someone finally does, you don't have to raise it at all.